Hello guys, you're with the podcast Perspective of the Mind, and I'm your host Diana. Today we are going to talk about so many interesting topics. We'll be talking about how to heal the trauma that has been caused to us. We'll be talking about love, about narcissism. In other words, keep watching because you're gonna like it. My guest today is Jenna Pacelli, the somatic therapist whom you already met in the 15th episode of the podcast. In order, guys, this episode to really make sense for you, I would recommend to go back and watch the first part of the interview with Jenna if you haven't done so, and then come back to this one. Okay, so let's go and enjoy watching.
Everything provided on this podcast is solely for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes. The information provided shall not be considered diagnostic, treatment of mental health conditions, therapy, or anything similar, and under any circumstances shall not replace medical or mental health treatment. The opinions of the host or guests are solely the views of the individuals and can be changed at any time.
Hello, Jenna, and welcome back.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
It's so nice. Always, it's such a pleasure to see your face and to talk to you.
You too.
And we are going today to discuss so many, trending, buzzworthy topics.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Can't wait to
Great.
ask all of that. Can't wait. Can't wait to ask all of my questions, Jenna.
Yeah. Great.
By the way, when
I'm
I said that
excited.
I cannot wait to ask all of my questions, and I remember that the other day I was reading a book of Osho, and he mentioned in the book that all of the questions that we are going to ask during our lives, they're coming either from our pain or from our unconscious mind.
Yeah.
And I was reading that and I was like, wow, I have a whole show where I'm informing people about my pain
Yes.
and about my unconscious mind.
Yes.
And if you don't know, now you all know.
Yeah. Yeah. So much of this work is that. It is so, when we really get into the body and the nervous system, it's deeply spiritual. It can be deeply spiritual. So, and archetypal and Jungian. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And if it's going to be helpful, let it be.
Yeah.
Okay, Jenna, the last episode, the first part, we were talking a lot about what is trauma, right?
Yeah.
Trauma, traumatic experience, and also how trauma can impact our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And today I want to start with the questions. How can we heal ourselves from the perspective of you as a somatic therapist?
Yes.
And if you want, you can use me as a client if I need to show something. I don't mind. Whatever makes sense.
Perfect.
So how can we heal ourselves?
The most effective way to heal from trauma is to build. It's actually a non-negotiable. We have to build safety in the body and the nervous system first. For any true nervous system work to happen, we have to build the person's capacity to tolerate big nervous system states and emotional states. And the way that we do that is by not going towards the stuff that's hard all the time, but actually going towards what helps you feel more like yourself, what helps you feel more regulated, what helps you feel safer, grounded, right? So there's these places it can be really easy to be like, I've got to work, and only go towards the traumatic material. And some trauma treatment modalities will say, go to the hardest part of this trauma, without preparing the person to actually be able to tolerate what comes up when they do that. So the best way, the foundation of all of this is we have to build someone's sense of, okay, I can do it. A sense of safety, a sense of connection, a sense of trust. Because so much of what's missing from trauma is that lack of safety.
But how do we do that? Like practically, how do we do that?
Yes.
If you don't feel that safety, for example, if you don't feel that trust.
Yes. There's a lot of ways to do that. And we could, you and I could sit here and I could ask you, Diana, like what one of the questions we like to ask is, what we call the conflict-free question. And usually it's conflict-free for people, sometimes it's not. But when have you felt in the last day, week, month, year, the most like yourself?
That's a good question. I would say most of the time I feel like myself because I'm
Okay.
putting conscious efforts,
Yes.
no matter what is the situation, just to be
Yes.
myself as much
Yes.
as possible.
Okay.
We have different kind of faces, let's call it, in different situation, but still I am not twisting that face too much. So most of the time I'm like that.
Okay. And so when you say that, Deanna, what do you notice in your body?
Calmness
Calm. Where?
in my stomach.
Yeah. Would it be okay just to track that and see how that lands? Just sort of let that, and then I like to say, like, steep in that, like you're like a coffee, like a French press. Just kind of let yourself notice the calmness in your stomach and just see what
Mhm.
happens next. And let me know.
I feel like the calmness that is in the stomach is spreading around. So it's
Yes.
getting into all of the parts of my body. It's coming up, it's coming down to my
Yes.
body. That's how I'm feeling, like an energy spreading from here to all of the parts of my
Right.
body.
Okay, great, great. Keep noticing that and just see what happens next.
By the way, I didn't expect that interview to go in this way, but let's do that. It's cool. What next? Let me stay there for a couple of
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah. Take your time.
I- I'm just like nothing bothers me.
Yes. So you have the thought that nothing bothers you.
Yeah, and that
And so,
feeling kind of.
yes. Yes. And so this is a
Of
good
course, I
example.
have this conscious mind thinking, well, I'm the host of, I have to do something here.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
But still, but I feel like calmness
Yeah.
inside of
Yeah.
my body,
Yeah.
and that is spreading.
Great. And when you have that nervous system state, there's a nervous system state that's more regulated here. We call this ventral vagal nervous, there's one term is called ventral vagal, and it's this ability to be socially engaged. We're connecting, and you're also able to connect to yourself. And then when you're in that place, you then have the thought that, oh, I can be like, I'm okay. And this is a good example of the way the nervous system states will speak. So people often have thoughts that run through their minds that they try to work on at the cognitive level, but they're actually just connected to a nervous system state. And if you shift the nervous system state, you shift the thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you do, and I'm just kind of going off on a limb here, like you do work that I think it seems like it's very meaningful for you. And you're constantly thinking about how can I improve myself and help others improve themselves. And like that, what you hear you saying is like, I feel like myself because I'm following my individual path, my dharma, my purpose on this
Mm-hmm.
earth. And that feels like alignment to me. And then when I ask you, when have you felt most like yourself, you're boom, able to go into your body and say, oh, it feels like this. And then it spreads, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which tells me you're doing your work. Like I can tell,
At least
right?
I'm trying.
Yeah, yeah, you're trying. I mean, I can tell, like you're able to kind of stay with that sensation. Well, some people are like, what body, what sensation? I don't feel anything. I'm numb. And that it takes a lot more work. But this is kind of the initial place of where we want to start, which is, when have you felt most like yourself? When do you feel most like yourself? And then work with that. And this could be like, hey, I feel most like myself when I'm doing drugs.
And
Like
then
it could
going from there.
Yeah. Like I'd be like, okay, tell me all about that. What's that state that you're in that you like so much? Oh, people are trying to manage their nervous system states in all sorts of ways. I'm not saying that they're all healthy or condoning all of those. However, we can use, they're all data for what the person's needing and looking for. Oh, I'm looking for a calm that I don't feel like I can get by myself. Like you, Deanna, just were able to like go inside and find your natural feel good chemicals inside your body like that very
Mm-hmm.
quickly. A lot of the population doesn't have access to that. So we actually have to build that over time. And there's a lot of ways of doing that. So if somebody's not as skilled as you or as self-aware as you, which is a lot of people, you know, they're gonna need work to kind of be able to even track what you just tracked. Like, it might seem obvious and easy what you just did, but it's not actually. It's actually highly complicated. Yeah.
And I'm going to go back to the first thing that you mentioned, that there are some theories that we have to face the trauma, the fears. What is your take on that? Is it
Yeah.
healthy for us to do that? Should we maybe do that step by step? Or
Yeah.
what do you think about that? Or you're taking the other approach?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've worked with a lot of folks who are, again, I think I said in the first episode, of like, they're sort of on the edges of the bell curve. So folks who traditional trauma treatment didn't work for, it harmed them, or they just had to keep coming back to it. It was just kind of a band-aid. So I've worked with, I tend to work with the folks that are fairly complex, and we have to get more creative and innovative in how we're working with them. But the idea of you need to go straight into the core of the trauma is bypassing the entire nervous system and how the nervous system works. The nervous system needs to have the capacity to tolerate large nervous system states that are going to be associated with the core of the trauma before anything's going to happen. Because if you do that before they have the capacity to be with that and stay with that, the person's fuses are just going to blow. So they're actually going to dissociate. They're going to, and so they might think they're feeling better, but they're actually just desensitizing to it through exposure over and over again. And it's not actually building up, again, the capacity in the nervous system to release those trauma states. We know through research that catharsis models, like scream therapy, like in the 70s, that was a thing that they would do. They have these like scream therapy retreats. And like, we know that that doesn't work. There's research on this. It doesn't work. So it has to be titrated in this way. It has to be slowed way down. And like in chemistry, if you remember anything from chemistry, most people don't, but you add a drop in and you let it settle and integrate into the solution. And then you add a drop in and then you let it settle and integrate into the solution. And you don't just pour one chemical into the other, because what might happen depending on what you're working with, it's going to explode.
Yeah.
And that's how our nervous systems work too. There's a reason people have trauma symptoms, because they can't actually process it at a deeper level. So we have to again, we have to slow it way down, bring in resource like I just did with you. And again, resource can look like a lot of things, but the person has to be able to truly, authentically feel a sense of resource before they're going to make any sustainable progress in trauma treatment.
Yeah. And when because you have mentioned like the talk therapy,
Yeah.
and a lot of people, Jenna, shared with me that despite the intellectual benefits and awareness that they gained after years of talk therapy, their lives remain the same. And and the familiar autopilot was recreating the story.
That's right.
I was going to use another word, but then I remembered that there are people probably watching. Yeah, it was just recreating the story. And why is that? Is it because you have what you have mentioned before a while, or you have something else?
Yeah. Have we talked about implicit and explicit memory?
Yes. In the first.
Okay.
Like you mentioned that, but you didn't really describe it, but you mentioned like
Okay. So there's different kinds of memory, and there's different parts of your brain. Talk therapy tends to the newest part of your brain is your neocortex, your frontal lobes, the outermost layer. And our brains evolved from the nervous system up into the neocortex. So the youngest part of our brain, again, is the frontal cortex, the frontal lobes, the neocortex, the willpower, the thinking, the cognitive thought, the talking. Like that is maybe 10% of our waking experience. Every single second we receive a couple 100,000 inputs into our bodies and nervous systems, and only 60 of them make it into the conscious mind. We might have talked about that. Okay. So then understanding like talk therapy and cognitive work is accessing the newest part of your brain. It's only accessing 10, again, maybe and this is an estimate, it's like, 10% of your waking experience. Okay, so that's fine, except for when you're stressed, your frontal lobes, your neocortex goes offline, essentially. There's reduced blood flow, reduced oxygen to those areas. And what people are left with is their limbic system, or their subcortical, the subcortical parts of their brain, the amygdala, their hippocampus, right? Like a lot of memory processing is happening in the hippocampus, the amygdala, which is looking for things I like and things I don't like. And so we have to understand that different kinds of therapy access different parts of your brain. So it's not talk therapy's fault. Like talk therapy is super useful. I'm trained as a talk therapist. It's not, it's just, it has its limitations. And that's often what I hear too, is from people who are like, I know what to do. I just don't do it. Like how many of us have said that? Yeah. You're not going to change your behavior until you actually get into where the behaviors are rooted, which is your subcortical brain and your nervous system. Another good example of this is like muscle memory. Muscle memory is actually nervous system memory. And we know this because when they put people under anesthesia, their flexibility drastically changes. So it's not actually a function of the muscles. The muscles are not that intelligent. They are, I mean, they're amazing. And like the thing that's controlling that is the nervous system. So when we turn off the nervous system memory, like in surgery, and put somebody under general anesthesia, and then they all of a sudden have amazing range of motion, right? We have to look at like what's going on there. And so there's that. We have to understand like where our bodies are actually operating from. And then the other piece is this idea of implicit versus explicit memory. Explicit memory is autobiographical memory. Most of us don't start to have autobiographical memory until we're maybe 4 or 5 years old. And that's when we start to have actual cognitive memories of our lives. That's like the story of our autobiographical is the story of my life. I could tell you what happened to me at age 5 or age 7 or age 12, right? There's a story connected to it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of, trauma treatment in the past has said like, tell your story and you will heal your trauma. This is actually, we know this to be actually re-traumatizing if the clinician is not skilled enough to incorporate the story with the body, because the body is operating from what we call implicit memory. It's how we know how to ride a bike. You get on a bike, even if you haven't been on one in 10 years, and you remember how to ride a bike. Yeah. And so there's this procedural memory that is operating and running our lives all the time. And Jung might have called this our subconscious. Freud had other words for it. It's like the psychology has been dabbling in this for a long, long time. So if we're only hanging out in the explicit memory and never getting into the implicit memory, most of trauma is living in the implicit memory in the body and not in the story. And I know another good example of this could be like a car accident. Somebody gets in a car accident, people come to my office and they've got a car accident and their body is going to remember. They might start moving their body in a way and I'll know, hey, did the car come from your right? And they're like, yeah. Like, how did you know that? I'm like, well, the way your body is moving, it's like, oh, I'm trying to go away from this thing and I'm trying to shield myself, and they're doing it automatically. Their body is showing me what happened. And so that is living in the body. Always, until you release it. It could be decades. Like I had a bike accident in college and broke my jaw and my nose and had a traumatic brain injury. And I had headaches a decade later, more than a decade, 15 years later still. And it wasn't until I worked on the scar here on my chin that I worked out what was going on, that I had a thwarted orienting response of like, where am I going to land? I'm going over the handlebars and where am I going to land? That was thwarted, that was interrupted by hitting my head on the pavement. And then it got stuck and then resulted in headaches 15 years later. It wasn't until I worked through the procedural memory in that the scar was holding that I was able to then work through, and now I don't have headaches. So.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
So honestly, I wish I knew earlier that, yes, talk therapy has its own place, right? It brings all that intellectual awareness and benefits, but we have to work with the unconscious mind.
Yes, yes, yes. People think they're making rational choices all the time. They think they're these super rational beings. They're not. We're not. We're operating out of our nervous systems and what our nervous systems are used to.
So we get on this earth, we get traumatized, and we work on our trauma if we don't want to recreate the pain. It's like, it should have been a better scheme for our presence on this earth. I mean,
yeah.
And Jenna, if we have to heal our bodies, our nervous system, how long does it take? Is it a
Um,
lifelong process for some of the things, or what is this?
yeah. Yes and no. I think, okay, so I would say there's a um there's a saying from AA, from Alcoholics Anonymous, that I love, which is, if you drive 100 miles into a forest, you're going to have to drive 100 miles out, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think,
Yeah,
especially with, there's a difference between
I like that.
yeah, there's a difference between developmental trauma and shock trauma. And developmental trauma, so people with developmental trauma, we all tend to have some form of some degree of developmental trauma. It's just ubiquitous. Depending on the severity of that developmental trauma, the is going to affect someone's ability to process adult onset trauma. So we know that the more developmental trauma somebody has, they could get into a minor fender bender as an adult and then develop full-blown PTSD symptoms because they don't have the resilience in the nervous system required to process something like that successfully. So it really depends on how long have you been at it? Is it developmental trauma, or did you have a relatively, like, securely attached childhood? You, like, it wasn't perfect, but you got on okay, and then you have, let's say, a shock trauma in adulthood, and you need a few sessions to sort of resolve that shock trauma piece. Folks, I've done a few sessions with folks, and they're like, okay, cool, bye. I'm like, bye, have a great life, you know, and I like, and they can do really well. But that's like, kind of, anytime you start working with a shock trauma piece, you're always going to end up having to work with whatever developmental trauma is not resolved. So it really
Yes.
depends on the person.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, I tend to see in my practice folks with developmental trauma, and shock trauma, it might take us a couple of years, and the first 6 months to a year, people who are really ready for this work will make incredible progress because they already have the awareness. They've been in talk therapy. They're willing to work hard, and and they show up and they practice, and they're like, and they get it. And there's a moment where people start getting it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in my practice, tends to be anywhere from 4 months to 8 to 12 months. And it'll
Yeah.
look like somebody's showing up being like, wow, I've been depressed my whole life, and I just realized I haven't felt depressed in 2 months. I just didn't even notice. So it can look like, or I haven't had a panic attack in months, and I didn't even notice I hadn't had a panic attack. It's kind of this subtle, sneaky progress that people make, after a lifetime of panic attacks or a lifetime of depression. And it's this sort of, again, subtle work that, shifts things.
Through your experience, you have seen that development trauma is more difficult to be resolved
Yeah.
rather than really those big shock traumas in the
Yeah.
adulthood,
Yeah.
which is impressive. How important is the childhood, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
What a role plays. What a
Yeah.
role plays.
Yes.
All right, and Jenna, as you already know that I'm in the psychological area for a lot of years. I'm learning, improving, studying, and so on. And I cannot tell you how many times I've heard people saying, I want to shine. I want to live with my full potential. I want to be my best self.
Yes.
But there is something dragging me down, And of course, like in different shapes, I've heard these sentences different shapes, but with the same meaning. So what is this thing that is drawing us down? Is it a game thrown?
Yeah.
I told you it should have been a better scenario for our human experience here on but who I am to judge, right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's the conditioning, right? It's our conditioning. It's our conditioning. It's the things that we learned to cope with environmental failure in our childhood. So environmental failure is when a parent is unable to adequately attune to their child in an emotionally regulated and safe way, such that the child doesn't need to then take care of their parents' feelings. A lot of parents are not able to do this because they haven't done their work on themselves, or they're in an active trauma state. They could be refugees in an active trauma situation. and they just don't have the capacity potentially and to be there for their child. And we also see, emotional availability and warmth even in the face of trauma if the parent had a more secure upbringing. And so, or even in the face of poverty, like, I actually just published an article on this, a research article on this you can find on my website about the effects of paternal presence on a child's life, having a father around, and they've controlled for the difference between mother and father and things like that. And having a father around is a massive buffer against toxic stress from the environment. So even if there's neighborhood assaults and muggings happening in the neighborhood is not safe, having emotionally available, involved parents is highly beneficial for the child. It buffers them against that toxic stress. And so we have to look at what is the parent's ability to parent. And by that, I mean to be emotionally available. The child doesn't need to take care of the parent's feelings. The child can be their authentic selves without worrying, like, do I need to manage mommy or daddy? It's not the child's job. And so, yes, when people are saying, I do these things and I can't sort of get out of them, we have to look at, how did you adapt? Why does it make perfect sense for you to have developed that adaptation or that strategy growing up? Like, if I was not, I talk about parental narcissism a lot. Like, if my parent is truly narcissistic, they will tend to compete with the child. So that they don't want the child, they don't want the child to make them look bad. So they want them to be successful enough because the child is a narcissistic extension of themselves. But also they don't want them to be too successful so that they don't outshine the parent. So the child in this example, this is more extreme, but they're put in this impossible double bind of, I can't be myself because I can't outshine my parent, but I also have to constantly be working to be enough for my parent, and it's never good enough. So the child is stuck. And so we have to look at these different dynamics of, like, how were you raised? And, folks that are more aware of their childhood and the impact on their childhood are much more emotionally available typically. Whereas folks who are saying, oh, I was fine, I turned out fine, and nothing happened, I don't really remember my childhood, but I had a great childhood. That's like a really, like, clear red flag of avoidant attachment. Someone who's like, oh yeah, my childhood was perfect. Nobody's childhood was perfect. It's literally impossible. You know, so
Yeah.
Someone's ability to acknowledge where they came from is going to be is deeply important in terms of understanding and renegotiating what happened, and then looking about how is that again hanging out in my implicit memory in my body. So like, if you had a behavior, Diana, that's like, oh, I don't like this behavior that I do. Okay, well, if we slow that down enough and get into what happens inside when you're doing that thing, and then we start to look at the sort of the nervous system precursors to that behavior, then you're going to start to see shifts. Oh, I actually get really frozen, and then I pick at my skin. Or, oh, I get really, I'm really sad. So then I actually cover it up with rage because the sadness feels like too much. And I can't tolerate the sadness because I don't want to be alone with the sadness. There's so many ways that this could show up, and we have to get into, again, where is this thing that you don't like that you're doing, whoever this is like there's some place that's going to be correlated in the body.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Going back to the question, you said that the reason for that thing that is dragging us down is the trauma. And here we are going with my question. I'll go a little bit outside of your expertise, but
Sure.
don't you think that it's also some karmic things? And do you believe in that fate and stuff? It's maybe not only, it's not maybe, I don't know.
Yes.
Those are very unproven things, right? But what do you think about that?
It absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely, you know, there can be karmic patterns, there can be intergenerational patterns. We know that, epigenetically, that if we come back to, if people need a science explanation for this, we know that trauma gets passed down in the nervous system at least 3 generations back, because we've looked at it through Holocaust survivors. And so we know, there's sometimes there's things that are like, this doesn't feel like mine. people will do a lot of work and a lot of trauma work, especially if they start getting into like somatic trauma work and things aren't resolving. Sometimes it's like, this was my mom's, this was my grandmother's, this was a lineage thing, past life thing. Yeah, absolutely. That
Yeah.
can exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many people, especially on Instagram, if you open, they talk about narcissism.
Yeah.
It's like a trendy thing. And
Yeah.
on one side, I think it's helpful because we have to bring awareness for unhealthy behaviors, right? On
Mhm.
the other side, we have to be careful because putting label on people,
Yeah.
it's easy and it's never healthy.
Yes.
And I'm doubting that all of the people putting labels really understand
Yes.
what exactly is
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm really against labels in general, so I think
Yeah.
we have to be careful. But anyway, I will use the opportunity that you're really into these things to ask you, what is the difference between narcissistic personality disorder
Yeah.
and narcissistic behavior?
Yeah. I agree with you in terms of the overzealous tendency that we have to label people with mental health diagnoses. I wrote an article on this, this exact thing, like this idea that, we love to slap all sorts of mental health diagnoses on people, clinicians very much included, from what we call the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the DSM. A diagnosis is, simply put, a shorthand concept for a cluster of symptoms that over the course of time, the folks that are writing the DSM have agreed upon are the criteria for XYZ diagnosis.
Mhm.
There's a lot of issues with it. There's a lot of issues with the DSM in general, pathologizing non-Western ways of being. I'll just say that as well. And it pathologizing all sorts of things, right? And so, yes, it's inherently, especially coming from, it's a Western diagnostic approach. And there's inherent flaws in that, and we have to look at who's writing this and who's voting. And it's like, is it inclusive? Is it, like who's actually contributing to this? So that all being said, yes, and I think with specific, the reason and in the workshops that I teach on narcissism, I have folks go through a checklist to say, is your parent narcissistic? Do they meet XYZ criteria? And most people who show up to my workshops are scoring out of 28, usually anywhere from 22 to 28, about their parent. And so the reason that I use the narcissistic term in my work anyway, is because for those folks, it's important that there's an acknowledgement of this. Your parent does seem to have this personality disorder. It's possible. Now, I can never, the problem too with narcissism is that a truly narcissistic person is never going to go to treatment. It's very rare for a narcissistic person to go to treatment. So you're not going to see them in treatment, or if they are in treatment, they're going to quit very shortly thereafter and blame it on the therapist, saying their therapist isn't good enough, or it's because the therapist starts, challenging them on their stuff, and then they leave. And then again, they'll find something wrong with the therapist and blame it on the therapist not being skilled enough. So you're not going to see these narcissistic people in therapy, which is a huge problem. And so narcissistic personality disorder is, does this person meet, and the DSM, they have more of a looking at it from the lens of overt narcissism, which is what we think of the traditional grandiosity, have to be loved, have to be praised, they're entitled, they lack empathy, this long list of sort of overtly narcissistic behaviors that tend to be assigned to men more often and less so to women. I think there could be gender differences here. But anyway, the problem that I see with folks that come into my work, at least, is
Mhm.
that they've been gaslit, and their experience of their parent has been deeply minimized for years and years and years, so they don't trust themselves. So saying to somebody, hey, if your parent meets this, 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 and this criteria, or a certain percentage of this criteria, they may have narcissistic personality disorder. And we need to acknowledge that for you so that you can start to see reality for what it is, because the folks that are raised by somebody like this will tend to continue to subject themselves to the narcissistic abuse. And so there's certain diagnoses, like an autism diagnosis, like that's a very important, or a bipolar or schizophrenia diagnosis. Like there's some diagnoses that are incredibly important, in terms of treatment, and the treatment protocol. And so I think it really varies within the DSM and what we're looking to diagnose. And, in order to diagnose somebody with a full personality disorder, they need to meet a certain percentage of the criteria in the DSM. Not every parent does. And all of us have narcissistic tendencies. We're all, as children, we're supposed to have healthy narcissism, which is kind of like, hey, mommy, look at me, watch me. Like I want to be seen. And if they get enough of that, they shouldn't develop narcissistic tendencies, actually, a kind of pathological narcissism. I think we have to be discerning. And I think a lot of folks, so like people are kind of slinging the PTSD diagnosis around all the time. It's like the same thing. It's kind of like you don't actually have PTSD, or that's, there's a lot of sort of overstating now that people have more access to psychological information. It's like there's more of that happening. And so, yes, we need to be discerning and also understand that like most diagnoses are a spectrum.
And
Yeah.
Jen, can you mention some of the criteria? I know it's a list, just whatever comes to your mind.
Overt narcissism is they have a sense of grandiosity, of I'm so important, I'm better than other people, I feel entitled. Massive criteria is lacking empathy in narcissism. Massive issue. They tend to lack self-awareness. They do not introspect. They will not go to treatment. The more narcissistic features somebody has, the less likely they are to go to treatment and stay in treatment. They have a tendency to control and manipulate others because they see other people as an object. They don't see other people as a human being with feelings and needs and pain. They just kind of see like everybody's sort of an extension of me, and they have this sort of fragility to them. They can't receive any criticism. They can't hear, their negative impact on others. They will deflect. They won't take responsibility. They won't own it. So I'm kind of mixing the official DSM diagnosis criteria with others, but yeah.
Okay, and now as I'm looking at the time, I want also to talk to you a little bit about love. I know that you're a licensed marriage and family therapist in the States.
Yes.
Not sure if you work specifically in this area, but anyway, I would ask my questions. Why do some people succeed to have healthy, intimate relationships, while for others it's hard to get there?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, I think it can be trauma, but I also think people can get lucky. And I think that not everybody gets lucky. And I think that some people, it's not in their karmic path. If we're going to talk about karma, I think that there's certain things that we are called to do in each life. And sometimes that involves relationship and sometimes it doesn't. And so I think it's a combination of trauma and your upbringing and your ability to stay connected and find healthy people. We know statistically speaking that most people on dating apps tend to have avoidant attachment. Right. So like, and not everybody, but like, the folks who are kind of chronically on dating apps, there's attachment issues. So, and struggle to be in a long-term relationship. So I think it's,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead.
And you've mentioned luck, so you believe in luck?
I don't know. I say luck because I think some people struggle with this idea of sometimes it's not in the cards. Sometimes it's not on in someone's life path to have a successful relationship. I do think there are, again, karmic, spiritual, dharmic
Things involved.
obligations. Yeah, obligations in life of like, like when and I'll go out on a limb here and share this, which is like when I was little, I had this sense of this knowing deep down. It was when I was really little, like 3 or 4. I had a sort of visceral sense that I was reincarnated, that I could have been born to I knew I could have been born as an elephant somewhere else, as a little boy in a different continent. And I was like, I often would question, how did I get in this body at this time, in this place, at this family? And was often disappointed. And and so that's my personal experience and my belief and what I've seen in terms of, the spiritual work that I've done, which is like, we don't often know. We don't often know. And you can know. I think that you can start to, the more you get into the body, the more you start to realize, people start to realize they've got some capacity. If they really, really do this work is deeply spiritual, like I mentioned in the beginning, and deeply archetypal. And there's a sense of there's some psychic stuff that happens where you're like, so it's a big question mark. And like,
Yeah.
and like, I don't want to kind of impose what I've experienced and what I believe on people, so they can take this or leave this. But yeah, that's my experience, is that like this life is a temporary experience for our evolution. And in the ancient yogic tradition, they talk about Maya. Maya is this illusion. It's the game. It's a game. It's a game. And it's all, and we take it so seriously, in many ways. And we need to, because it's hard, like being human is fucking hard. and one of my teachers is like, he's a spiritual medium, and there are, mediums that are have been scientifically proven to be real, to be able to communicate with the next, with the dead, with the deceased, or the departed. And, he is one of those people who is deeply connected. And he's like, getting close to source energy is like a really quickly moving steel blade fan. And the one that he's like, the closest I can get is to like the source's daughter, who's sort of like playing the game. She's like the puppeteer, and she's like Angelica from Rugrats, and she's kind of evil, but not evil. She's just sort of like curious. She's just like, what would it happen if, like, what would it be like? It's like, this is consciousness trying to experience itself.
Yeah.
And so he was saying, like, you can't just sort of try to touch into source, because like you better be able to like operate at that frequency, that speed, so that your finger doesn't get cut off when you start to approach source.
Yeah.
Right. And this is, people are trying to override this and skip all the work and skip the spiritual work and skip the nervous system work and go straight to source. And it's like whether that's heroin or sex or mushrooms or ayahuasca or whatever, and they're like trying to touch source, and then there's gonna be consequences without doing the work. So this is a bit of a segue.
When you said about the psychic people, we had such a person, very famous in Bulgaria, and
yes,
she's called Baba Vanga in Bulgarian.
Okay.
And she was used from a lot of governments also, like really everybody knows her.
Really?
And she predicted so many things, something like Nostradamus, I guess. And do you know, Jenna, because I tend to have a lot of empathy for people, and I get very emotional for some things when I see bad stuff. And then I remember, and then I remember her words from one of the interviews. She's not alive anymore, and she says, I can feel the pain of the people, all the people, and different dimensions, talking to dead people and so on. And she said, every time I start to feel the pain of people, I hear a voice saying to me, don't be sad, people deserve what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, seriously,
Yeah.
like so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why in the beginning I said, who I am to judge, right? Who am I to judge that it should be better?
Yes.
Nobody.
We don't know. Exactly. We don't know. Exactly. We don't know why.
We don't know the whole
don't always
picture.
know why. No,
Yes.
we don't have the whole picture. Exactly right. That's exactly right.
And
Yes.
sometimes I'm even thinking, yeah, we are going into this. We have to work on ourselves and deal with the trauma and so on. I think it should be like with some limits, because we are powerful, but we are not that powerful.
Yeah.
If you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
As one of my guests, Ryan Keyes, said in one of the previous interviews, he said, yes, we are powerful, we create, but we cannot change the direction of the earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
No matter what we are doing.
Totally.
There are some things we will never be able to stop, and better to make peace with them.
Yes.
Okay, two last questions. I know that we have to finish very soon, so I'm going to a bit unpleasant topic. You shared publicly that you have lost the love of your life.
Yeah.
And I'm really deeply sorry about that. I cannot imagine the grief, the sadness that comes with that. And you have you say the following. I want to quote you as it's beautiful. I've never met anyone else like you.
Yeah.
Like you ever. Not before you, not after you, and I'm at peace now.
Yeah.
And I'm reading that and I'm like, wow, I love to hear about that deep, deep connection and love between people.
Yes.
And I want to get your advice here about people who are experiencing the same. They're grieving because they have lost their loved ones, but they're just grieving that in their cards, maybe it's never written to be in healthy relationship.
Yeah. You know, for the longest time, I didn't talk about him. Or if I did, I would minimize it. And I would make it better to take care of other people's feelings. And I have to grieve that too. There's a place of grief around that, of like, I had to do what I had to do because I had no resources. I had no support. I had none of this nervous system work to process that when he died. And so I had to sort of grieve the fact that I couldn't even acknowledge for a long time what he meant to me. Or I went to talk therapy, and it was kind of this kind of positive psychology that minimized it to make it more tolerable. And I think this is and that can be appropriate when, again, we don't have the resources, we don't have the bandwidth. I was dissociating constantly when that was, I was deeply depressed. I was suicidal. And I never talked about that either. I only maybe told my therapist that I would love to be dead. I'd rather be dead than this. And I was anxious, and I was dissociating all over the place. And I think that, we have to develop the capacity to be with something that's so horrible. It's not a cognitive process. I had to really learn to be in my body over a long time to even be able to return to that grief and really acknowledge it. Like, the fact that I even talk about it publicly on my platforms is like a massive shift for me. And it's because I had a moment at his grave. I had avoided his grave for a long time. And I had a moment asking him for help on some things. And I had a bit of what I realize now is a clairvoyant moment, and a bit of a mediumship moment of like, I got an answer from him. And I was like, who's talking? I was like, what?
What was that experience about?
The what?
Yeah, about this experience. I'm curious. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Like, I was like he responded. And it has a different quality because I've done so much work. I know what is mine and what's not in my body. And I know what's mine. There's a quality of things that are mine versus a quality of something that's not mine. Okay. And because I've done the somatic work and somatic experiencing for so long now, I'm like, I know the difference now. And so I could trust, wait, that wasn't me. oh my God. And I'd had a medium experience a few years after he died, that I was totally out of the blue with a woman I'd never met before. She just approached me and knew all this stuff only he and I knew. And that was the first of many moments of like, wait a second, like people don't die. People just change frequencies, and so that we can't see or hear them or feel them anymore. And so, and it's still so it's crushing, you know? So I thought he went away, and I went through a lot of time of self-abuse because I thought I was alone, and I thought he wasn't there, and I thought he wasn't coming back. And you know, and there's like a place of like where I have to keep working to forgive myself for all the things that I did to myself, primarily in relationship, you know, subjecting myself to awful relationships. And
Yeah.
and so you know, in terms of coping with something like this, it's the most important, you know, I'm in a mentorship group for other widows and other people who have lost their partners, and a lot of them are they're fresh out. They're, you know, that's just happened more recently, and I can see how frozen everybody is. I'm watching everybody on the screen, and like they're all frozen and dissociated, and putting on a brave face. And I think that's one of the biggest disservices we can do to ourselves in our grief is trying to make it better. It's not better. It will never be okay, you know, and like to acknowledge that, I think, is the healing. It's like, it's not okay. And for people to let themselves say that. And I didn't get that. I had a lot of people pressuring me to be okay, a lot of really nasty things that one of my parents said to me that were just horrific. And so it's like, what kind of support are you giving yourself? And are you telling yourself it's going to be okay, or it's going to be, you know, eventually I'll get over it. If it's the great love of your life, you're not going to get over it. And that is okay. You know, like, it's okay that I'm sad, and it's okay for me to say, yeah, I'm sad every day. You know, and I think that that's so important, is just to let people, like, for people to acknowledge where they actually are and own that. You know, for me to even just let people see my sadness is like a huge sign of growth for me. Like, I would just put on a happy face. I was super polite. I was super nice to everybody. And I was dead inside. And you operate from that deadness. You operate from that place. And that's what then ruins your life. You know, and it can ruin your life if you operate from a disowned deadness. You know, and so this, you know, this, even me crying, or me expressing like, yeah, I'm sad every day. There's a sort of river of depression that will always be there. And like, that's okay. Like, that is my aliveness. That is the truth. And I think that's the thing that's like so missing from the grief conversation, from the loss conversation, is where are you actually? How do you actually feel? You know? And I think did I answer your question?
Yeah, you answered my question, and I cannot anything else to say, Jenna. Then I feel you.
Thank you.
Fully feel your pain.
Thank you.
It just,
Thank you. Yeah.
and I'm so sorry about that. What is love for you?
What
There
is
are
love?
so many different forms and shapes of love, right? Not only intimate relationship. There are pets, so many different forms.
Oh, the thing that just came to me is, you know, this is not an all-inclusive idea, you know, definition of love, but I think it's the ability to be with someone in their pain. So you being with me in my pain right now is a form of love. Me sitting with my clients and hearing the horrific things that have happened to them, and me sitting with them without trying to change them and change the pain and get rid of the pain. Love. It's letting someone, you know, seeing someone's full self, the fullness of who they are, and loving them and being there and not turning away from them. You know, again, this is, of course, I'm going to put caveats on this in terms of abuse and narcissism and things like that. And, you know, but if we're just going to talk about love and pure love, it's, can I be present with you exactly as you are? It's self-love for me to be present with myself and not change that, not try to, again, make it okay, make it go away, say, oh, he wasn't the love of my life. He was. He is. He is, and that's okay. You know, I would rather have that than have him cross over and know that I was deeply loved like that than never have had it. You know, so I think love is really love is on the same, it's the cousin to pain. It's the other side of the coin of pain. Because when you love something deeply, like, you can lose them. And a lot of spiritual bypassing teachings will say, like, don't be attached. It's not in our wiring. It's not how we're built. We're meant to love. We're meant to experience pain. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to, you know, all these things that we're trying to get rid of all the time, like, we're doing ourselves a disservice. We're not loving ourselves when we're trying to get rid of some internal experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jenna, for being so vulnerable, real, raw, authentic with us. I think that through showing your vulnerability, you give the chance to others always to do the same.
Thank you.
Because we as human beings, we all feel different kind of emotions, and if somebody says that they have done the work and they're just only now happy and content and never feel, it's a complete lie.
Yes,
a complete lie.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So I really appreciate your vulnerability and what you have shared with us.
Thank you.
Okay, we really have a couple of minutes, and I don't know if you know, or maybe you don't know, it doesn't matter. I finish usually every interview with a sentence. I start a sentence and then I ask my guest to finish the sentence without thinking. So I start the sentence, you finish it, whatever comes. Just one sentence.
Great.
Yeah? Ready to do that?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. People heal when?
They get in their bodies.
During my personal healing journey, I've realized that
I'm okay.
The first step to healing is?
Learn to look for safety.
The world really needs?
The ability to sit with pain.
If I could change one thing in the world, it would be?
Our ability to sit with each other's pain.
And one last question that I ask everybody. I really believe in?
Love.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you.
Thank you,
such a good episode. Wow.
Thank you for all your wonderful questions and your heart and all the work that you're doing to bring this all this information into the world. This really matters. Thank you.
Yes. It was
a
a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.